Hello and welcome to week 13 of Communication Conflict Resolution. It's me, Mike. Remember me? Hope all's going well for you guys, and we are now beginning Module 6, which is negotiation, but I also added emotions here because we're going to spend a little bit of time on the front end of this week. In fact, you'll find that there's a discussion post that largely focuses on emotions. But that actually builds up to what we're going to talk about in negotiation. Obviously, emotions play a big part in whenever we have negotiations with others. So these two modules tend to bleed together a bit here in the first portion here of week 13. So here's kind of what week 13 looks like. Total points are 40 points. So we got a discussion post on Thursday this week, which is April 18th. And then we have a reading quiz, number 10, on Sunday at midnight, which is worth 15 points. So not a lot of points, but a fun chapter nonetheless. And obviously, there's 2 weeks here. We're going to talk about negotiation writ large. So exciting topic, and I think certainly we talk about things that are prescriptive, things that help you in your day-to-day life. I think this chapter and this module in particular is going to be rise to that level. So. All right, so first you want to do is watch this video. If you're doing that, that's great. This will be a little longer because there's a bit of content, quite a bit of content here, so I'll try to be quick. So watch this, and then, of course, along the way, you want to read Chapter 5 because we'll touch on the keys here, but you'll want to read the chapter as well. So there's no link to any article this time around. We're actually having to go back into the book for this week. 2 videos I want you to watch in advance of submitting your discussion post number 5, which I'm titling Finding Your True Colors. So finding your true colors is kind of neat because both of these videos talk about color coding and how we view ourselves and how our brains process things. So without giving away too much information there, I'd like you to watch those 2 videos before you post your discussion number 6 post, Finding Your True Colors. Then you can kind of pivot, cleanse the palate a bit, because then we're going to clearly talk about negotiation. There's 2 videos I want you to watch. They're short ones. They're just fun little videos, but both in their own way illustrate some points we'll make regarding negotiation. So that's it in a nutshell for this week. Let's press on. So as we know, emotions are powerful motivators for us as human beings, and obviously it behooves us to get a handle on what's going on with our emotions. Certainly we can fight them, or we can learn how to harness them. And this chapter in particular, emotions and negotiation together, really speaks to that in a big way. So we've talked about emotional intelligence. Last week I had you guys take the EQ little mini tests, and maybe some of you guys took the bigger test, who knows, but it's something a lot of people kind of are surprised about how important it is. But it's lots of employers are actually looking at this very hard, particularly if you've got a job working with other team members. It's super important to do that, and obviously lots of companies focus on this. So here's a way it breaks down. Now, it's not just a simple number in many cases, like I've led you to believe in the beginning here. They look at these in 4 quadrants. So self-awareness, how aware are you of you and your own self, how well you manage your time and your efforts, your social awareness, and, of course, how you manage others. All of those kind of roll up into a larger idea of emotional intelligence. So I'm not going to read all of these little bullets here, but you get the idea. It's more complex than we had first talked about. All right, so watch those 2 videos. The first one, obviously, is from Louise Evans. So they're both TED Talks, all right? So I'm a big believer in TED Talks. These are exceptional, both of these. Hard to pick which one I like better. They're both really good, and they both use what I'll call the concept of color and its connection to emotion. And they both use them in different ways. So this is kind of a position piece here, this post. So what I want you to do is make one post of 400 to 500 words. So one post after watching the 2 videos. And then I want you to kind of reflect upon your own emotional intelligence after watching these 2 videos. The first one, obviously, is more about kind of taking stock in who you are and how you behave in situations. And Louise Evans is a great speaker, and she does a really nice job using what she calls the 5 chairs technique. And then I want you to watch the second video featuring Scott Schwefel, who is obviously, again, another great speaker, and TED Talks are kind of known for that. But he talks about another way. I'm a big believer in knowing thyself and getting to know who you are. Here's another way of looking at that. So it's color coded. So there's 4 colors, and my question to you is, which color are you? Now, you might be a blend of different colors, and a lot of people are. So it's not a perfect science. So you're not everybody's a red versus a blue. you may find different parts of yourself. So watch that video, and along the way and within that video, take stock in who you are. So once you've watched that, I want you to reflect upon that, and of course then turn and write your discussion posts. So here are some questions you may want to ask yourself as you do this. Which of these two speeches or TED Talks did you resonate to most, and why? What similarities between the two did you see? For example, the 5 chairs concept with Evans and the 4 colors personality indicator from Schwefel. Now, specifically to Schwefel, number 3 there is, which of the 4 colors do you think you are after watching that video, and why? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And the last thing I want you to do is just pivot off of this discussion regarding emotions and kind of this color discussion, and talk about what's your big takeaway after watching these videos and reflecting upon all of the discussions and things you've read thus far in emotions. And the last thing I want you to kind of touch on as you complete your post is to reflect upon your self-knowledge and how that might help you be a better negotiator. Okay, so that's post 6 now. It's a little free form here, but I'd like you to be focused. And 400 to 500 words seems like a lot, but it's really not. Also, I'm asking you to kind of reflect upon others' posts, so we get this more interactive piece going. So like we've done in the past, 50 words this time for each response. If you want to go longer, that's not a problem, but make it focused for 25 points for this assignment. So quickly, which color are you? These are the 4 colors that our speaker talks about in the video: cool blue, fiery red, caring, earth green, and sunshine yellow. I tend to be a blend of sunshine yellow and fiery red, in case you were wondering. But I'd like to know what yours is. And again, we're taking stock. We're looking in the mirror almost in a way at our own style. So these are some things he'll talk about here. And this is based on Jung's preferences. So Myers-Briggs is also based on this, and a lot of others are rooted in Jung's principles. I love this example within the video. So think about this example. He talks about when you're going up an elevator and how each color behaves. So it's a great way to kind of recognize yourself in each of the examples there. This is our good friend, the iceberg sort of model in theory, and there's probably millions of different ways to look at this. But again, I want to reflect on this because above the ocean there, obviously we've got things we want and things that are overt, things are on the table, money, goods, services, things like that all require negotiation of some kind. What I want to talk to you about now is kind of the emotional part behind this, underneath the waves there, the core concerns. That's what they're called, core concerns. These are the unspoken, written, or hidden issues in negotiation that we need to be aware of. So again, we're not psychologists necessarily, but I guess what I wanted to do is, from a communication standpoint, which both verbal and nonverbal, so body language, things like that, you can pick up on some of these things. So what are core concerns? They are human wants that are important to almost everyone in virtually every negotiation. They're often unspoken, but are no less real than our tangible interests. So again, looking above and below the waves there. The problem is they're hidden, right? So even experienced negotiators are often unaware of the many ways in which these concerns motivate their decisions. So really, the better you are at determining these core concerns, the better off you'll be as a negotiator. So really, what I want to talk about most here in this little section is about appreciation, all right? So it takes 2 to tango. You've heard that statement before. It takes 2 to tango. This idea of appreciation can go a long ways toward mitigating the other. In other words, understanding and appreciating the other. So how do you feel when you're ignored in a conversation, right? When you're ignored, you believe your thoughts, feelings, and actions are devalued. That's really often what happens when people just kind of gloss over what you've said. On this joke here, we're looking for someone who would be comfortable toiling in obscurity for at least 30 years, which is sad to say. This is a comic, but it's all too true in some cases. So how do you overcome this? So I want to talk about a few different ways you can appreciate this. And again, these are tips for you as we get into our negotiation piece more and more. First thing I want to mention to you guys is this is not a way of giving into the argument. It's more or less creating space where you guys can have a discussion versus an argument. So how do we do that? All right, so really in that little gray part in the middle, that's your side, their side, and the truth. And in that little space there is the truth. Now, what you can't do is go into the conversation or this negotiation or thinking that you're right in every case, right? You have to have an open mind. That's the first thing, and really appreciate what they're saying. So we're going to talk about some tips and tricks for how to train yourself to do that. So I like this graph here. This is the truth, right? So you got one shape that could be seen from different angles that look differently. So it's a circular shape, but it's three-dimensional, right? And if you look at it from one angle, you've got a circle. If you look at it from another angle, you've got what looks like a rectangle. So really, it's a simple way of articulating what I'm talking about here and wanting to understand the other person's point of view. Really what we're talking about here, guys, is empathy at the end of the day in some ways here, and just understanding and appreciating another point of view. So that's the first one, right? Just understanding the other person's point of view. The second one here, if you want to show appreciation, is to find merit in what the other person thinks, feels, or does. Now, in this case here, so me, it's all about me. And who likes to talk to anybody who talks just about themselves all day long, right? So periodically, you want to just say, well, how do you think or how do you feel about this as you're going along the way? Particularly if you happen to be an extrovert and the person you're talking to is more introverted and less likely to share. My wife and I, for example, have that situation. She is not, well, she's loosened up quite a bit, but early on especially, my opinions tended to overwhelm her and many others, frankly, as well. So I've had to use this a lot in my career and my life, just understanding and appreciating the person's point of view. The third one is, of course, demonstrating your understanding of the merits you have found in their arguments. So not just saying, oh, I understand that, but also saying, all right, I see a silver lining here. I see what you're saying. So you really want to demonstrate your understanding of the merits you have found in their argument. And there may not be a lot, but there's always something. And really what you try to do here is create common ground. Another quote you could say is, I'd be really upset if that happened to me. So again, commiseration with them. And I should do that more with my kids, frankly. Another way of appreciation, or finding common ground rather, is this idea of affiliation. So a core concern is affiliation, describing our sense of connectedness with another person or group. It is the emotional space between us and them. So some ideas on how to improve your structural connection. You can find common ground through age. So in other words, I'm 53. People in my age group, we have common things we can talk about through our age. And obviously there's maybe, and I don't believe this personally, but I think age commands some certain amount of respect, particularly if you're a young person talking to a person who's older who may have seen things. Now, this is a discussion my daughter and I have pretty much daily, that she thinks, I in my head tell myself that she seems to think she knows everything already as a 15-year-old. So I have to step back from that as well. And conversely, I think she should take a hint and suggest and understand that I may have a understanding that she has not experienced yet. Of course, rank, if you're talking about anything related to the military or any other profession that has a tiered structure, acknowledging their rank is another way of saying, I'm affiliated with you. Family, of course, background, and mutual interests all kind of round out this different way of thinking about affiliation. And that's really important, right? Just finding common ground through this affiliation piece is a great way of demonstrating appreciation. So affiliation also can be thought about this way. So think of the other person as a colleague and work on ways to build your relationship. So again, finding one of these areas here and then building on that. How do you do that? So we meet in person. We can meet in person. I think emails tend to be impersonal and two-dimensional. If you meet in person, you get this chance to really kind of engage with them and use active listening, right? And do some of the things we talked about here with regard to appreciation. Talk about things that you both care about. And don't be afraid to give the other person space if you sense you're making them uncomfortable. So again, watching those nonverbals, using active listening, and making sure that you guys are aligned. And sometimes, like I said, you may have a person who's not willing to share that they're uncomfortable. So you just maybe sometimes have to be a sleuth that way. Last thing I want to say about affiliation is don't be afraid to let the public see the two sides working together to find a resolution, particularly in the context, let's say, for example, you've got a business discussion going on that's contentious. And sometimes that happens within the organization where one department is pitted against another. So I've had this situation. I used to work in marketing for a very long time in my career before becoming a full-time teacher. And oftentimes we've had altercations with the sales department and sometimes engineering and other places. Marketing was kind of like the black sheep of the family, as it were, for a company, because particularly companies that didn't believe in marketing. But wherever possible, when I had these come to Jesus meetings with other departments, I would make sure that people knew we were working together toward a solution. So negotiators often fight for status because they believe there's only one single dimension of status. As we've seen now, this is not true, right? So there are many types of status we can think about, right? So acknowledging someone's education. So if someone has a PhD or even a master's degree, you can acknowledge that as a way of saying, all right, I get where you're coming from, and I acknowledge your expertise. Technical skills of any kind, frankly, is a way of kind of leveling the playing field. Life experiences. So if somebody's been through a lot of things that you haven't experienced before, acknowledging that is really half the goal to mitigating and creating a safe negotiation space. Social skills and emotional insight are all other things that are intangibles that negotiators can kind of take into stock. Now, it's funny to me how many times you see negotiators who have kind of a singular focus and really are not able to look at the 360 picture. So really, I encourage you guys, again, to kind of look at this from many angles. And you're always looking to find a way to help reduce emotion is really what we're doing here. So acknowledging status, right? Be courteous to everyone. Acknowledge status wherever due. And really don't, like this quote here, to not have your suffering recognized is almost an unbearable form of violence. So what you're really doing is acknowledging the other. Last thing I want to say about affiliation is to trust your instincts here. Use your rational head. Does it make sense? And also, how do you feel? So the rational and the emotional side. A lot of times, in fact, there's tons of research on this, that your gut instinct, there's a great book called Blink, and another called The Tipping Point, written by Malcolm Gladwell to get at this point in a big way. But use your gut. Trust your gut. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. We're going to kind of pivot and maybe focus now more on negotiation. And we're going to talk about Chapter 5, negotiation skills and resolving conflicts with others. Again, always in the background, we've got emotions, right? So that's an important thing to think about. So negotiation is listed as a skill that requires listening, critical thinking, and communication. So here, this cartoon here is showing a bunch of different ways to think about this, and obviously a lot of pitfalls, a lot of possible solutions to any negotiation. So really, it's an art form at the end of the day, and the people who are really good at this really get the emotional side as well and understand that. You can't just look at it from one angle and hope to be successful, right? You've got to look at it from many different angles. So Chapter 5 discusses strategies, tactics, and skills, and then examines ethics and cultural factors in negotiation. So that's really this chapter in a nutshell. Henry Kissinger, who's been around forever and a day, it's surprising he's even still alive, to be honest. But he has been through numerous different presidencies, always as a diplomat. And he said, in a diplomatic negotiation, you always meet the other side all the time. Even if you should succeed in outsmarting him or in pressuring him, it only sets up a cycle in which he will try to get even. So another way of saying this is what comes around goes around, really. You could say that more quickly and more succinctly. So just know that if you win one, you may very well lose the next time around because they're going to be pitted against you in a bigger way. So what's the trick there? Well, learn this in this chapter. And in fact, this week and next week, we're going to talk about how you can win and still make the other party feel like they've won. And that, I think, is a great way to upset this karmic cycle. And that's really what it is, in my mind, is a karmic cycle where what comes around goes around. So more on that when we get to it, but just want to share this quote with you to start off with. So some definitions here, and this is in the quiz, these 3 negotiation definitions here. The first is from Kissinger himself. And he said, negotiation is a process of combining conflicting positions into a common position under a decision rule of unanimity. So really fancy way of saying, working together toward a solution. Number 2 here is negotiation occurs whenever people cannot achieve their own goals without the cooperation of others. And the last version of this, because it is a bit murky, right? You've got different ways of thinking about negotiation, is, quote, negotiation entails 2 or more interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, who engage in social interaction to reach a mutually satisfactory outcome. That's from Putnam and Roloff. So all of these are technically correct, right? So there's no one clear solution or one clear definition for these. All right, shortly after this, in this chapter, they talk about something called Zeitman's 5 negotiation strategies. And I've broken this up into 2 buckets, okay? The first is what are known as distributive approaches, or zero-sum gains, which I'll explain in a second here. But zero-sum gain, in a nutshell, is essentially that both parties kind of get a piece of the whole pie. But there's a portion of the pie. There's only 100% of the pie, so 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever happens to be the case. These approaches really focus just on the distributive approach. So in other words, taking what you've got in front of you. Okay, so conversely, we'll talk more about the integrative approach, which is really more about making the pie bigger. So we'll talk about that in a second here, but let's talk about these first. Distributive approaches, right? Not as powerful, I would say, as integrative approaches. The first is structural approach, in which power is a central determining factor, right? And we've seen these before where you've got two powerful, well, maybe you've got one powerful entity against another, or maybe two powerful entities. Either way, as we discussed in Chapter 2, the very powerful don't always win over the powerless. Remember when we talked about Saul Alinsky and some of the things you can do to take back power in those situations. To explain this, structuralists include availability of alternatives, the use of tactics, and negotiation skill. But either way, there's a structural approach to negotiation there. And again, that's just one of three examples of distributive approaches. The second is a strategic approach. And this is more science-oriented, right? So left brain, based on mathematics and decision theory and rational choice theory. So theory, generally speaking, but again, it's still short-sighted in some ways in that it's just seeing what's in front of you. Negotiators are seen as rational decision makers who make choices based on which decision best serves to maximize their gain. So really, there's not much in the way of empathy in the strategic approach. It's just more about the facts. And I've had plenty of people I've known over the years who focus primarily on the strategic approach without taking into concern the emotional or human side of that. And the third one here, processual approach, is really a combination of the structural and the strategic. And it looks to learn from each party's concession behavior to communicate intention. So it's a combination of both structural and strategic. So let's talk more about zero-sum game. Like I said here, it's zero-sum game. We are opponents, right? It's a competitive sort of approach or style. A lot of people in this country, in fact, versus other countries, like, for example, Japan, where it's more collaborative. But here in this country, by and large, you've got this opponent-based sort of approach. My interests, I win. Your interests, you lose, right? So zero-sum game is what that's known as. Here's another way of looking at this, and this is what you see today here, especially in the U.S. We have this prevailing business ideology of hang on to what's mine. And really, if you look at any business slides, I teach media planning and buying, and I have the students kind of break down the competitive set. In other words, who's vying for the pie in a specific category. Let's say, for example, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi versus RC versus any other soda manufacturer, right? There's one piece of the pie there, and how do they divide that up? So hanging on to yours is really an example of this distributive approach or zero-sum game. All right, let's talk about integrative. Kind of more fun and obviously a little bit more win-win approach to these negotiations, right? And things you should strive to achieve in negotiations using some of the things we've talked about. So the behavior approach focuses on negotiators' personalities, right? Now, obviously, you're not dispensing with these other ideas here, right? Some of the facts, but also you take into account the individual persons, the people that are involved. So individual negotiators look to benefit their own interests, right? And that's what we've talked about. Altruistic negotiators, which we're talking about here with the behavioral approach, are motivated by an exclusive concern for the other party. So the cooperative style is oriented toward concern for the well-being of both parties. And largely the integration approach, you frame negotiations as opportunities for win-win, like we've talked about, right? When you have an orange, and you find after discussions that, and I've got another example I want to share with you guys here coming up, but that one party wants the peels for cooking, and the other wants the fruit just to eat it and enjoy it. And that's a win-win. But it doesn't happen quickly or easily in every case. So growing the pie so that everyone can have a bigger piece is really what integration is all about. So love pie, and here's an example of that. Distributive negotiation only admits that there's a pie that size. Integrative negotiation takes a different look at it and has a more holistic point of view. So looking for solutions to the problem that may not be on the table with the distributive approach. A little cartoon on that. So, and this is a lot of companies do this as well, to use the example again of business. This joke here, the idea is not to only grow our piece of the pie, but to also expand to other nearby pastries. To borrow a piece of language from that, It's known as white space, right? So a company who's looking to push into areas where their brand is currently not existing, right, is an example of diversifying and growing the pie. Same thing is true when we have negotiations, right? There are ways to come up with things that are meaningful to both parties that make the pie bigger. So another way of looking at this, win-win is the goal, right? So win-win, zero-sum gain is, okay, here's what you get, right? Here's the pie. I get half, you get half. Versus the win-win game, which is essentially saying, all right, I work for a company. I'm selling you these 9 products. Maybe there's 5 other products I can tack on or add to this, sweeten the pot for you as the manufacturer or the retailer, to make the pie bigger. So we both make more money. But the same is true, again, in negotiations, right? You may find things that are left off the table in the zero-sum gain side of things or the distributive side through just conversations and discovery. All right, some tactics I want to share with you guys as well as a part of this chapter. So I got some examples I want to share with you. I want you to watch this video first on Haggling 101, which kind of gets at some of the basics here. And that's known as single issue numerical bargaining. Okay? And this video here, Haggling 101, is from Pawn Stars. So it's a quick little ditty on that. And the guys from Pawn Stars, the show there, kind of break down how they do it. Okay? And we'll talk about different ways to do this, but what I want to share with you guys here is this idea of single issue numerical bargaining. So single issue means there's one thing, right? One issue at stake here. The cost, in this case, in pawnbrokers or Pawn Stars really, is just I have this item. How much would you pay me for it? So the seller's range is really where the seller is willing to go, and the highest desired price. And most often, if they're smart, they'll start at the highest price they think they can get for it, right? Then this little green area here in the middle is the zone of possible agreement, or ZOPA. And below that is really the desired price of the buyer, so the range of the buyer, right? In that green space there is where you can negotiate. Single issue non-numerical. So this one here is just about price, right? So, or hours or whatever you can think of, but it's a numerical bargaining. This here is a little bit more abstract. So this little article or this little cartoon, these two cartoons kind of get at that here. In this case here, obviously this person's golfing with his boss, which could be good or bad. But in this case here, they're both thinking different things, right? If he misses this putt, I'll never promote him because he's not willing to, go for it. And conversely, this guy's thinking, gosh, I better not make this putt or he'll never promote me. So this disconnect here is really one of the issues with non-numerical bargaining. Something called multiple issues negotiation, which is a big swing here, but it really is different in the biggest way in that it's got lots of things going on, right? So most negotiations involve more than one issue, as we know, and that's true of most of these. So like single issue bargaining involves making concessions. So along the way you give certain things up to create a better whole. But like I said before, if you can make the other person feel like they're winning the negotiation, and yet you're winning also, so that's kind of the win-win, what we're looking for here. So in single issue, the concessions are roughly equal, but in multi-issue, a concession is only equal because the groups say they are. So that's important, right? So a lot of times with multiple position bargaining, you're going to have people bundling things together and calling them equal to kind of make things smooth, if that makes sense. Whereas in single negotiation, where you've got this one item, one price, one decision, it's pretty cut and dried. Here, because you've got a lot of things going on, people tend to bundle them together and call them equal, if that makes sense. And that makes negotiations smoother. But at the end of the day, you can take stock in what you've came away with and put a value on that. All right, so let's talk about win-win a little bit here. And this is obviously, again, the high watermark, not always available to us. But again, like the orange example we've used in the past, it is something you can strive for and potentially get. So remember that collaborating is not compromising, and win-win negotiating is not compromising either. So here's the example that this chapter talks about, right? So you've got a car, and you've got two people looking to buy a car. I believe it's a case of a student trying to buy a car from another person. The car price is $5,700, and the offer is $4,800, right? Now, if you use this example again here of the ZOPA, they've got some room to work with here. So straight haggling over the car leads to an impasse. In this case, right? They both know she wants to sell the car and she wants to buy the car. So really what we want to do here is ask some questions and think about different ways to think about this, right? So person one who wants to buy the car does not have access to the full price, whatever price they decide on. And that's why they're sticking with the $4,800. Now, they both know the car is worth $5,700, right? So at the end of the day, how do they compromise? They end up splitting it into 2 payments, and that satisfies person 2, who is the buyer, their requirement to buy the car. And the person then, of course, person 1 who's selling the car gets their money and has no problem getting 2 payments versus 1 payment. So it's a win-win. That wouldn't have happened had they not discussed it in more depth. So something called positional bargaining is often the first strategy adopted in a negotiation. In general, it consists of establishing a position and arguing for that position. Okay, so it's just saying, all right, here's my thoughts on this, and it's kind of more direct. Here's what I believe, and I'm going to argue that till I'm blue in the face. And then there's something called interest bargaining, which is more interesting. In general, interest bargaining is not dependent upon issues and positions, but instead strives for agreement on the shared problem. So, like I said, more complex than positional bargaining. I want to talk about interest bargaining a little bit more here, right? And this is good timing because obviously we're at the cusp of season 7. If you haven't watched Game of Thrones, I highly recommend it if you can stand the blood and guts and gore. But a good example is Jon Snow here for interest bargaining. So I want to use this as an example. Interest bargaining requires that parties forego many of the assumptions of positional bargaining and follow these principles. So again, I'll explain this here, but Jon Snow is kind of the protagonist in the story here, and he's been through a heck of a lot in the story. You don't have to watch this to understand what he's going through, but essentially there's lots of infighting amongst different clans and different kingdoms. All along the way, Jon Snow is aware of a bigger threat that they all face. His challenge is to let everybody know about that in no uncertain terms, right? That they all face a common enemy. And so really what he's trying to do there is he's going around the campfire to everybody. Some points, and this is illustrated perfectly by what Jon Snow has been doing, really. And I've got a little short video to show you this example, because there's lots of conflict, and it's not always a popular thing to do to interest bargain. First thing you want to do is share relevant information critical for effective solutions, right? So Jon's trying to call attention to the fact that there's the army of the dead marching upon everybody. And in fact, if they are successful, everybody will die, right? So not everybody believes that at this point, right? So he's trying to share relevant information critical for the effective solutions. Second piece, focus on the issues, not the personalities. And the clip I share with you here is of a young boy confronting Jon Snow as to why he's befriended a certain group for that goal, right? The larger goal is to band together and fight a common enemy. In spite of that, emotions get in the way, and this young person is questioning why he would befriend a group of people who killed his family. So focusing on the issues and not the personalities is really the goal there, right? And that's what Jon Snow is doing here in spite of everything. And it puts him at great peril, frankly, to do that. But nonetheless, he does focus on the issues. Third point, focus on the present and the future, not the past. People want to talk about the past, and using the wildlings example again, which is another band of people that commonly thought to be bad. But again, Jon Snow's larger point is to focus on the present and the future. Present danger of the group of people attacking everybody, the group of the dead, coming after everyone here. And so focusing on the present and the future. What could the future be? Well, it could be a future of just death and destruction unless they band together. The past is the past, right? And that's what Jon's main message is in the Game of Thrones. Fourth point, focus on the interests underlying the issues. So what are the interests? Survival, right? In this case, not who is sitting on the throne at any given moment. It's more about we have to band together to beat the common foe. The fifth point, focus on mutual interests, helping to satisfy the other party's interests as well as one's own. Again, it's obvious here, banding together will satisfy everybody's needs to survive. And last but not least, evaluate options developed to satisfy those interests by objective criteria. So again, these are all things that Jon does, and again, this is what we do at interest bargaining, right? You're taking a holistic view and setting aside the past and the emotions for the greater good. The key, interest bargaining assumes that parties should work together to achieve solutions that satisfy mutual interests. Okay, interest bargaining serves to enhance the relationship between the parties and among the parties, I would say. In the case of Game of Thrones, there's numerous parties kind of battling it out, and the whole 6 seasons kind of shows that in different ways, with the real threat looming in the background. So collaboration and interest-based, focusing on mutual gains, seeking underlying needs, being joint problem solvers. Again, it's together, together, together. Separate the people from the problem, right? So that's the other thing we have a problem with, right? And again, the example I used, the video you'll watch of the young boy confronting Jon Snow about his family. Obviously he's a young boy, not able to see the bigger picture, but the goal here, as much as possible, is to separate the people from the problem. In this case, the wildlings being the people problem. Sharing information, and that's sometimes, we've heard that knowledge is power, right? Sometimes people withhold information, and Game of Thrones is no stranger to that. Building relationships where they weren't before, inventing multiple options, and using objective criteria and principled approach. And again, Jon Snow embodies that principle. On the other side of this is what we see a lot, right? In this country especially, but focusing on maximizing our own gain. So the win-lose sort of approach to negotiation. Staying at a position level, viewing others as opponent at all costs. In other words, you are you and I am me, and I'm going to get mine at your expense. Attacking people rather than the problem. You see that a lot in politics today. I'm not going to call any names, but we see a lot of this in our political structure today. And guard, withhold information versus sharing information. So again, holding that close to the vest, because that's an advantage in these situations where we may have an adversarial approach. Discount a relationship or willing to sacrifice it in competition. So we're willing to give up certain things to gain against, again, it's not a win-win, right? There's loss involved. Drive for desired outcome. It's at any cost, I want to get what I want. And then finally, more likely to use negative leverage in these situations. So obviously, we want to go toward the light here and a collaborative approach. A couple of final points here on hallmarks of the skilled negotiator, right? So now, you would think that a negotiator who's skilled would be doing a lot of talking. Well, quite the opposite is true. Good negotiators really are good listeners. So that's the first thing. And I'm not the best listener. I'll be the first to admit that. My wife would probably second that. But obviously listening is a key skill. So I would say, even in addition to this class, you could take a listening class and really benefit from that. But listening generally more than talking is important for a skilled negotiation. Ask good questions that serve to verify information. So you're always looking to qualify things. Ask creative, open-ended questions. What ifs? A lot of what if questions. A lot like what I do in marketing, right? When you're trying to find a creative solution to a problem, is no different here. You're asking what if questions that maybe seem out from left field, but ultimately can lead to some really cool solutions. And the last point here is the objective is to give the other party the opportunity to provide information, exchange concessions, and move toward an agreement. So really having an open mind, and when you're employing an adversarial approach or a positional approach, that gets shut down. Hard negotiators create difficult environments for sure, and that's on purpose in a lot of cases. I've seen examples, and you'll read this in this chapter, about folks who put their negotiation partner into tough situations to create these environments. Hard negotiators also use threats and promises, right, to get what they want, and create artificial deadlines to force concessions. Hard versus soft. If you have kind of a hard negotiator versus a soft negotiator, you're most likely going to lose if you're the soft negotiator, right? So you're going into a tough situation where the other person has the leg up. And I tend to be much softer in my approach, generally speaking, so I know that to be true. Not suggesting that you should be a hard negotiator, but you should at least know what you're getting into and know the person's style. So with that, I'm going to close out here, and we're going to kind of pivot next week and continue talking about negotiation here writ large. A lot of fun here. There's an article that I want to share with you guys, and this is, again, practical information about negotiation that we'll talk about in week 14. That's my information there if you need to reach out to me for anything at all. Hopefully this has been pretty straightforward, and so far so good this semester. Good luck with everything, and we'll talk to you guys again next week.